The blood on Annalise Zimmerman's hands had long since dried by the time she stumbled into Granite, Colorado. But she could still feel its phantom warmth between her fingers as the first cry tore from her throat, somewhere behind the blacksmith's forge. It was August 1878, and the sun bore down merciless on the dusty streets while she pressed her back against the weathered wood and let the grief take her, just as it had every month since that terrible night in Kansas when her sister died screaming her name. Fletcher Quinn heard the sound as he was leading his horse toward the livery stable. Most men in Granite would have kept walking, minded their own business, but Fletcher had been raised by a mother who taught him that some sounds demanded attention. The crying was raw, desperate, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unhealed. He tied his stallion to the post and followed the sound around the back of the forge, where the mountains rose up behind the town like ancient sentinels. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and a dress that looked like it had seen better days. Her face was buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. Fletcher stopped a respectful distance away, removed his hat, and simply stood there. He did not say it would be all right. He did not ask what was wrong. He had learned long ago that some pain could not be bandaged with words. Annalise felt his presence before she saw him. She looked up through tear-blurred eyes to find a man perhaps 25 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in winter. He was not staring at her with pity or curiosity. He was just there, solid and quiet as the mountains themselves. "I am sorry," she managed to say, wiping at her face with shaking hands. "I did not mean to make a spectacle." Fletcher shook his head slowly. "No spectacle, just a woman who needed to cry." He paused, then added, "The forge gets hot this time of day. There is a bench in the shade by the general store if you would prefer." She nodded, trying to collect herself, and he turned to lead the way without waiting for further answer. They walked in silence, and somehow that silence felt like a kindness. He did not fill it with empty reassurances or prying questions. When they reached the bench, he simply gestured to it and then settled himself on the edge of the store's front porch, giving her space but not abandoning her entirely. Annalise sat and pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve, pressing it to her eyes. The crying fit was passing now, leaving her hollow and exhausted. It always followed the same pattern. The memories would rise up like a flood, unstoppable, and she would find herself somewhere alone, breaking apart all over again. Then the tide would recede, and she would gather herself up and continue on until the next month brought it all rushing back. "Thank you," she said after a long while. "For not asking." Fletcher glanced at her, a faint hint of understanding in his expression. "Some things do not fit into words anyway." They sat in companionable quiet for several minutes. A wagon rattled past. Someone called out a greeting to Fletcher, who raised a hand in acknowledgement but did not rise. The afternoon heat pressed down on the town, and in the distance, a dog barked. "I am Annalise Zimmerman," she said finally. "I arrived in Granite 3 weeks ago. I work at the boarding house." "Fletcher Quinn. I run cattle for the Triple Bar Ranch north of town. You come into town often enough." He studied her for a moment, then looked away toward the mountains. "I lost my father 2 years back. Stampede. Some days the grief just sits quiet. Other days it rises up like a storm." Annalise felt something loosen in her chest. Here was someone who understood. "My sister," she said softly. 7 months ago, I could not save her." Fletcher nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed more sympathy than 1,000 empty condolences. They did not speak of it further. When Annalise finally stood to return to the boarding house, Fletcher simply touched the brim of his hat and watched her go. She thought about him that evening as she served dinner to the boarders, an assortment of miners and ranch hands who paid little attention to her beyond ensuring their plates stayed full. The boarding house was run by a stern woman named Mrs. Calloway, who believed in hard work and propriety in equal measure. Annalise had taken the position because she needed employment, and Granite seemed as good a place as any to disappear into her grief. But she had not disappeared. The grief found her regardless, and now so had Fletcher Quinn. September arrived with cooler winds that swept down from the high country. Annalise had almost forgotten about the cowboy until the next crying spell hit her near the end of the month. This time she had managed to make it to the small cemetery at the edge of town before the sobs overwhelmed her. She knelt among the weathered headstones, pressed her hands to the ground, and wept for her sister, for the life that had been stolen, for the helplessness that still haunted her dreams. She did not hear him approach, but when she finally lifted her head, Fletcher was there. He stood beneath a cottonwood tree, hat in hand, watching her with that same quiet presence. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not offer platitudes. He simply waited. Annalise rose on unsteady legs, brushing dirt from her skirt. "You found me again." "I was riding past," he said simply. "Heard you." She wondered if that was true or if he had been looking for her, but she did not ask. Instead, she walked toward him, and together they made their way back toward town. The sun was lowering in the west, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. "Does it get easier?" she asked. Fletcher considered this. "Different. Not easier, just different. You learn to carry it better." "I do not know if I want to carry it at all." "You do not have much choice in that." His honesty was strangely comforting. So many people had tried to tell her that time would heal all wounds, that she needed to move on, that her sister would want her to be happy. But Fletcher just acknowledged the weight of grief without trying to lighten it with false promises. "Would you like to walk?" he asked when they reached the edge of town. "There is a trail that follows the creek, peaceful this time of evening." She should have said no. She barely knew this man, but something in his steady presence called to her, so she nodded. The trail wound through aspen groves and pine, following the clear water that rushed down from the high country. They walked side by side, not touching, speaking little. Fletcher pointed out a deer in the distance, and later they paused to watch a hawk circling overhead. The simple normalcy of it soothed something in Annalise's battered soul. "Tell me about your sister," Fletcher said eventually. "If you want to." Annalise took a breath. Her name was Charlotte. She was 19. She had a laugh that could light up a room and dreams of becoming a teacher. The words came slowly at first, then faster. "We were traveling from Missouri to Denver. There was an accident with the wagon. It overturned in a river crossing. I got out, but Charlotte was trapped underneath. The water was so cold and moving so fast. I tried to pull her free, but I could not." "I could not." Her voice broke on the last words, but she did not cry this time. She had cried herself dry at the cemetery. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. "You tried. That matters. Does it? She still died." "It matters," he repeated with quiet certainty. "You did not abandon her. You fought for her. Sometimes we fight and still lose, but the fighting matters." They walked until the sun had nearly set, then Fletcher escorted her back to the boarding house. At the door, he paused. "I come to town most Saturdays. If you need someone to walk with, I will be around." "Why are you being kind to me?" Annalise asked. He settled his hat back on his head. "Because someone should be." October brought the first snow to the high peaks. Annalise fell into a rhythm in Granite, working at the boarding house, keeping to herself, counting the days until the grief would rise up again. She found herself watching for Fletcher on Saturdays, and he was always there, a steady presence among the chaos of weekend commerce. They began to talk more. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his mother who still lived there and wrote him letters full of concern and love. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had died of fever when she was 17, leaving just her and Charlotte to make their own way. "We were going to start fresh in Denver," she said one afternoon as they sat by the creek. "Find respectable work, maybe open a dress shop someday." Charlotte was so excited she had it all planned out. "You could still go to Denver," Fletcher suggested gently. Annalise shook her head. "I cannot face it without her. Every dream we had was together. Alone, it just feels empty." Near the end of October, the crying came again. This time Annalise was in the root cellar beneath the boarding house when the memories overtook her. She sank down among the bins of potatoes and preserves and let herself shatter. The sound must have carried up through the floorboards because within minutes she heard boots on the stairs. Fletcher descended into the dim space, carrying a lantern. He must have been in town, must have come to the boarding house looking for her. He set the lantern down and lowered himself to sit on the floor across from her, his long legs stretched out, back against a support beam. He did not say a word. He just sat there while she cried, a silent anchor in the storm of her grief. When the worst had passed, Annalise looked at him through swollen eyes. "How did you know where to find me? Mrs. Calloway said you came down here. I took a guess. You should not have to do this. You should not have to keep finding me like this." Fletcher met her gaze steadily. "I do not have to do anything. I choose to." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, and in the lamplight his features looked younger, more vulnerable. "Because the first month after my father died, I went to pieces in a line shack up in the winter range. I was alone for 3 days, and it nearly broke me permanent. I kept thinking that if someone had just been there, not to fix it or say anything particular, just to be there, maybe I could have carried it better." He paused. "So when I hear you crying, I come. Simple as that." Annalise felt tears rise again, but different this time. Not the drowning grief, but something softer. "Thank you, Fletcher." No thanks needed. They sat in the root cellar until Annalise felt steady enough to stand. When they emerged, Mrs. Calloway gave Fletcher a sharp look but said nothing. The older woman had clearly formed her own opinions about the cowboy who kept appearing when Annalise needed him. November arrived with bitter cold and snow that lasted for days at a time. The boarding house was full of men waiting out the weather, and Annalise worked from before dawn until long after dark. She was exhausted and lonely, and when the monthly grief came, it found her in the stable behind the boarding house where she had gone to escape the noise and crowds. She was not surprised when Fletcher appeared in the stable doorway, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. By now it felt almost inevitable, this pattern they had fallen into. He brushed the snow from his coat and settled himself on a hay bale while she cried into her hands. But this time, when the tears subsided, Annalise found herself angry. "I am so tired of this," she said, her voice raw. "I am tired of crying every month. I am tired of the pain. I am tired of missing her so much I can barely breathe." Fletcher nodded slowly. "Being tired of it is not the same as being done with it. When will I be done with it? Maybe never. Maybe you just get better at living alongside it." Annalise stood and paced the small space, frustration radiating from her. "I want to move forward. I want to feel something other than this crushing weight. But every time I think I am healing, it all comes rushing back." "That is grief," Fletcher said quietly. "It does not follow a straight line. It circles back, catches you unexpected, but look at you. You are still standing. You are still working, still living. That takes strength." She stopped pacing and looked at him, really looked at him, at the way his eyes held steady on hers, at the quiet confidence in his posture, at the patience that seemed woven into his very bones. Why do you keep coming back, Fletcher? Really? He stood, moving closer but still maintaining a respectful distance. At first it was because I understood the pain, but now, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Now it is because somewhere along the way, finding you became the most important part of my month. Annalise's breath caught. Fletcher, I am not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know you are grieving. I know you are not looking for complications. I just wanted you to know the truth. She closed the distance between them, stopping just inches away. What if I want complications? Then I would say you should be sure. I am not a man who does things halfway. Neither am I. They stood there in the quiet stable, snow falling outside, the moment stretching between them like something fragile and precious. Then Annalise reached up and touched his face, her palm against his cheek, and Fletcher closed his eyes like a man receiving benediction. I cannot promise I am healed, she whispered. I cannot promise the grief will not keep finding me. He opened his eyes, covered her hand with his. I am not asking for healed. I am just asking for a chance. She kissed him then, soft and tentative, and he responded with a gentleness that made her chest ache. It was not a passionate kiss, not yet. It was something quieter, more profound. A promise and a question all at once. When they pulled apart, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. We will take this slow, he said. Whatever pace you need. What if I cry every month for the rest of my life? Then I will find you every month for the rest of my life. December brought a Christmas dance to Granite, held in the largest barn in town with fiddle music and cider and the whole community turning out despite the cold. Fletcher asked Annalise to accompany him, and though she felt nervous about being seen publicly as his companion, she agreed. She wore her best dress, a deep green calico that Charlotte had helped her sew 2 years ago. The memory brought tears to her eyes as she pinned up her hair, but they were softer tears, gentler. Fletcher called for her at the boarding house, looking clean and freshly shaved in a black coat and string tie. You look beautiful, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe it. The barn was warm with body heat and lamplight, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. Fletcher was not a graceful dancer, but he was earnest, guiding her through reels and waltzes with focused determination. Annalise found herself laughing at his concentration, and the sound of her own laughter startled her. It had been so long. What is funny? Fletcher asked, a smile tugging at his mouth. You look like you are herding cattle, not dancing. Dancing is harder than cattle. Cattle do not care if you step on their feet. She laughed again, and he grinned at her, and something bright and warm unfurled in her chest. They took a break from dancing to drink cider and talk with other townspeople. Annalise was introduced to Fletcher's friend Marcus, another ranch hand, and to the schoolteacher Miss Peterson, and to the mercantile owner Mr. Chen. People were friendly, welcoming, and slowly Annalise began to feel like she might actually belong in Granite. Late in the evening, Fletcher led her outside for fresh air. The night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. They walked a little way from the barn, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. I have been thinking, Fletcher said. The ranch where I work, the foreman's wife is looking for help. She runs a garden operation, sells vegetables to the mining camps come summer. She needs someone to help with planting and tending. It would pay better than the boarding house, and you would have your own cabin. Annalise considered this. Why are you telling me? Because I want you to have options. I want you to build a life here if you choose, not just exist in grief. She turned to face him fully. And if I build a life here, where do you fit in it? Fletcher stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Wherever you want me. I would court you proper if you would allow it, but even if you would not, I still want you to have the chance at something better. You are something better, she said softly. He kissed her then, longer and deeper than before, and Annalise felt herself melting into it. His arms came around her, solid and warm, and for the first time since Charlotte died, she felt safe. The end of December brought Annalise's monthly grief, but this time it was different. She was in the cabin that came with her new job, having accepted the position working for Mrs. Henderson at the Triple Bar Ranch. The cabin was small but clean, with a stove and a bed and windows that looked out toward the mountains. When the tears came, she let them fall, but they did not consume her the way they used to. She heard a knock at the door and knew it would be Fletcher. He had moved his bunk to the main bunkhouse closer to her cabin, a fact that had raised some eyebrows among the other hands, until Fletcher made it clear he was courting her properly, and anyone who had comments could take it up with him directly. She opened the door to find him there, hat in hand, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. "Heard you," he said simply. "Come in." He stepped inside, closed the door against the cold. Annalise sank onto the bed and he sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She cried, but quieter now, and he put his arm around her, solid and sure. "Tell me about Charlotte," he said when the tears had slowed. "Tell me something happy." So she did. She told him about the time Charlotte had tried to bake a cake and somehow ended up with batter on the ceiling. About the summer they had spent an entire afternoon catching fireflies in jars, then stayed up all night watching them glow. About Charlotte's terrible singing voice and her beautiful drawings, and her habit of naming every stray cat that crossed their path. Fletcher listened, occasionally asking questions, helping her remember the joy alongside the loss, and when she was done talking, he held her while the night deepened around them. "I love you," she said into the quiet. She felt him still, then tighten his arms around her. "I love you too. Have for a while now. Even with all the crying, especially with the crying. It means you loved her fierce. I admire that." January 1879 arrived with bitter cold and heavy snows that buried the ranch for days at a time. Annalise worked alongside Mrs. Henderson in the hothouse, planning the spring garden, learning about soil and seeds and the particular challenges of growing vegetables at high altitude. The work was satisfying, and Mrs. Henderson was kind, a weathered woman in her 50s who had raised 5 children and seemed to have infinite patience. Fletcher came to the cabin every evening after his work was done. Sometimes they just sat by the stove and talked. Other times he taught her to play cards or she read to him from the books she had brought from Missouri. They were building something between them, steady and strong as a house frame. Near the end of January, Annalise woke to find fresh snow covering the world in white silence. The grief rose up as she dressed, familiar now in its monthly rhythm, but not overwhelming. She went about her morning chores with tears sliding down her face, and when Fletcher appeared at the cabin door, she simply opened it and let him in. They had developed a routine. He would sit with her, sometimes in silence, sometimes encouraging her to talk about Charlotte. He never tried to stop the tears or hurry her through the pain. He just anchored her, steady and present, until she could find her footing again. "I was thinking," Fletcher said as they sat together after the crying had passed. "Come spring, I want to ask you something important, but I will wait until you are ready." Annalise knew what he meant. "You could ask now. I want to do it right. I want to give you time to be sure." She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I am already sure, Fletcher Quinn, but I will wait if it matters to you." He kissed her knuckles. "Spring, then, when the world is new again." February was brutal, with temperatures that dropped below zero and winds that howled through the ranch like living things. The cattle huddled in the low areas, and the ranch hands worked in shifts to keep them from freezing or starving. Fletcher came to the cabin exhausted every night, and Annalise fed him hot soup and bread while he thawed by the stove. When her grief came at the end of the month, she was prepared. She had been helping Mrs. Henderson preserve vegetables in the root cellar when the tears started. Mrs. Henderson took one look at her face and said, "Go on, child. I can finish here." Annalise walked back to her cabin through snow that reached her knees, and Fletcher was already there, waiting on her porch. He must have been watching for her, knowing the time was near. They went inside together, and she cried against his chest while he held her and murmured soft words into her hair. "It is getting easier," she said when she could speak again. "Not the missing her. That is just as hard, but the carrying of it. You were right about that." "You are stronger than you know," Fletcher said. "I am stronger because of you." He tilted her face up, his thumbs gentle on her cheeks. "You were always strong. I just helped you remember it." March brought the first hints of spring, though snow still covered the high country and frost lingered in the mornings. Annalise began preparing the garden beds in the hothouse, starting seeds that would later be transplanted outside. The work filled her with hope, this tangible evidence of new growth, new life. Fletcher was increasingly busy as calving season began. Annalise saw him less during the day, but he still came to the cabin every evening, even when he was so tired he could barely stand. They had become essential to each other, woven into the fabric of each other's daily lives. When the crying came at the end of March, Annalise was in the garden, turning soil in preparation for planting. Fletcher found her there, kneeling in the dirt with tears streaming down her face. He knelt beside her without a word and took up a second spade, working the soil while she cried. The simple act of working alongside her, sharing the task without trying to fix her pain, was perhaps the most profound gift he had ever given her. Later, when they had both washed up and were sitting in her cabin, Annalise said, "I think I am ready for that important question." Fletcher looked at her carefully. "Are you certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything." He stood and pulled a small box from his coat pocket. Inside was a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "This was my grandmother's ring. My mother sent it to me for Christmas with a letter saying she hoped I would find the right woman to give it to." He knelt before her, the ring in his palm. "Annalise Zimmerman, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Fletcher, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She pulled him up and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that kiss, all the love and gratitude and hope that had been growing in her heart. They were married in April, when the aspen leaves were just beginning to bud and the high meadows were carpeted with wildflowers. The ceremony was small, held in the Granite church with Mrs. Henderson and the ranch foreman standing witness. Annalise wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and Fletcher wore his best suit with a wildflower boutonniere. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to more eyes than just hers. They walked out of the church into brilliant sunshine, hand in hand, beginning their new life together. The ranch foreman had given them a week away from work as a wedding present. They spent it in the cabin, learning each other, talking and laughing and making love with a passion that surprised them both. Fletcher was gentle and patient, mindful of Annalise's inexperience, and she discovered that physical intimacy could be both joyful and profound. On their fourth night as husband and wife, Annalise woke from a nightmare, Charlotte's face vivid in her mind. Fletcher woke instantly, gathering her into his arms. "I dreamed she was still trapped in the water," Annalise whispered. "I could hear her calling my name." "She is not trapped anymore," Fletcher said firmly. "She is free, and she would want you to be free too, I know. But the guilt. The guilt is just love with no place to go. So you give it to me, and I will help you carry it." She cried against his chest, and he held her until she fell back asleep, safe in the circle of his arms. When the end of April brought her monthly grief, Annalise was planting tomato seedlings in the garden. Fletcher was mending fence nearby, close enough to hear when her breathing changed and the tears began. He walked over, knelt beside her in the dirt, and simply placed his hand over hers where it rested on the earth. They stayed like that for long minutes, connected by touch and shared silence, while Annalise let the grief wash through her. When it passed, she looked at him and saw her whole future in his eyes. "I want to have a baby," she said. "I want to build something new." Charlotte would have loved being an aunt. Fletcher's expression softened. "Then we will make her an aunt in spirit." May brought warmer weather and longer days. The garden flourished under Annalise's care, and she spent her days tending plants and planning the harvest. Fletcher worked long hours with the cattle but always made time to sit with her in the evenings, talking about their day, planning their future. Near the end of May, Annalise felt the familiar rise of grief, but it was gentler now, more like a wave lapping at the shore than a tsunami threatening to drown her. She was in the cabin making bread when Fletcher came in from work. He took one look at her tear-stained face and pulled her into his arms. "Tell me," he said. "I was thinking about how Charlotte will never get to meet our children. She would have been such a wonderful aunt." "Tell them about her," Fletcher said. "Keep her alive in the stories. That way she will know them, in a sense." The simple wisdom of it made Annalise cry harder, but these were cleansing tears. She clung to her husband and let him anchor her through the storm. June arrived with heat that baked the valley and turned the high meadows green and gold. The garden was producing now, and Annalise spent her days harvesting lettuce and radishes and peas. Mrs. Henderson took the vegetables to the mining camps and came back with money that she split with Annalise, more than she had ever earned at the boarding house. Annalise and Fletcher had settled into married life with surprising ease. They fit together naturally, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. When the monthly crying came, Fletcher was always there, a steady presence that never wavered. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Annalise said, "I think I might be pregnant." Fletcher went very still beside her. "Truly, I am not certain yet, but I think so." He pulled her close, his hand protective on her still, flat stomach. "That would be a miracle. You would be a wonderful father, and you will be a wonderful mother." They sat together as the light faded, dreaming of the future, of the child who might be growing inside her, of the family they were building together. July confirmed what Annalise had suspected. The doctor in Granite examined her and pronounced her about 2 months along, with the baby expected in late January or early February. Fletcher was beside himself with joy and immediately became protective to the point of absurdity, trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a spoon. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Annalise protested when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of beans. "You are carrying our child. That makes you precious." "I have been precious to you since long before this baby," he grinned at her. "Fair point." When the crying came at the end of July, Annalise was resting in the shade of a cottonwood tree, escaping the afternoon heat. Fletcher found her there, tears tracking down her face, and settled beside her with his back against the trunk. "I wish she could know about the baby," Annalise said. "Maybe she does." "Do you really believe that?" Fletcher considered. "I believe love does not end with death, so yes, I think Charlotte knows, and I think she is happy for you." The certainty in his voice comforted her. She rested her head on his shoulder and let the tears come and go like a summer rain. August brought extreme heat, and the daily work of keeping the garden watered. Annalise's pregnancy was starting to show now, a small swell beneath her dresses that made her both excited and terrified. Mrs. Henderson had become a source of wisdom and advice, having been through 5 pregnancies herself. Fletcher doted on Annalise, bringing her small gifts from town, rubbing her feet in the evenings when they ached, reading to her when she was too tired to hold a book. Their love had deepened and matured, becoming something unshakable. When the August crying came, exactly 1 year since that first time Fletcher had found her behind the blacksmith's forge, Annalise was overwhelmed by how much had changed. She sat in their cabin, her hand on her growing belly, tears flowing freely. Fletcher sat beside her, his own hand covering hers. "A year ago I thought I would never be happy again," she said. "I thought grief was all I had left. And now I have you, I have this baby. I have a future I actually want to live. Charlotte would be proud of you. I hope so. I hope she knows I still love her even though I have found joy again." "Love is not a finite resource," Fletcher said. "You can love her and love this new life at the same time." September brought cooler temperatures and the beginning of harvest. The garden had produced abundantly, and Annalise and Mrs. Henderson worked long days preserving vegetables for the winter. Annalise's energy was flagging now as her pregnancy progressed, but she pushed through, determined to complete the season's work. Fletcher worried about her overdoing it, but Annalise insisted she needed to feel useful, needed to contribute. They compromised, with her working shorter days and resting more frequently. When the crying came at month's end, Fletcher held her on their bed, his hand gentle on her swollen belly. The baby kicked against his palm and they both stilled. "She is saying hello," Fletcher whispered. "She." "Or he. I have a feeling it is a girl, though." Annalise pressed her hand over his. "If it is a girl, I want to name her Charlotte, Charlie for short." Fletcher's eyes grew bright. "Your sister would be honored." October brought the first hard frosts and the final rush of harvest. The garden was put to bed for winter, and Annalise shifted to indoor work, helping Mrs. Henderson with preserving and planning for next year. Her pregnancy was obvious now, her belly round and firm beneath her loosened dresses. The baby was active, kicking and rolling, and Annalise found herself talking to her unborn child, telling stories about Aunt Charlotte who was watching from heaven. Fletcher would often join these one-sided conversations, his deep voice mixing with hers as they shared their hopes and dreams for their child. The monthly crying came while Annalise was folding baby clothes that Mrs. Henderson had given her, tiny garments that had clothed all 5 Henderson children. Fletcher found her holding a small gown, tears streaming down her face. "Charlotte should be here," she said. "She should be knitting booties and arguing with me about names." "I know." Fletcher sat beside her, careful of her bulk. "But you carry her with you. Every story you tell, every memory you keep alive. She is part of this baby's heritage. Promise me we will always tell our children about her." "I promise." November was cold and quiet, the ranch settling into winter routines. Annalise was large now, moving slowly, tired easily. Fletcher had taken over most of the household chores, cooking and cleaning while she rested. The baby was due in about 3 months, and they were both anxious and excited. The monthly grief came while Annalise was sitting by the stove, knitting a blanket for the baby. Fletcher was mending tack at the table, and when he heard her breathing hitch, he looked up. "Come here," she said, and he moved to sit on the floor beside her chair, his head resting against her knee. She cried quietly, one hand on her belly, the other stroking Fletcher's hair. The baby kicked, and Fletcher placed his hand where he could feel the movement. "3 of us now," he said softly. "You are not alone in the grief anymore. I have never been alone in it. Not since you found me that first time. I will keep finding you, for as long as you need me to. Forever then." Forever it is. December brought deep cold and heavy snows. Annalise was confined mostly to the cabin now, too pregnant and the weather too harsh for her to venture far. Fletcher made sure the cabin was well stocked with food and firewood, and he rarely left her alone for long. Christmas was quiet, just the two of them exchanging simple gifts. Fletcher had carved a cradle from pine, smooth and perfect, and Annalise cried when she saw it. Her gift to him was a new shirt she had sewn, each stitch placed with love. The monthly crying came on a snowy afternoon. Annalise was standing at the window, watching the flakes fall when the grief rose up. Fletcher wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands protective on her belly. 2 years since she died, Annalise said. It feels both like yesterday and like a lifetime ago. Both can be true. I miss her, Fletcher. I will always miss her. I know, and that is all right. They stood together at the window, watching the snow blanket the world in white, and Annalise felt the baby move between them, a reminder of life continuing, of love multiplying, of hope persisting even in the midst of loss. January 1880 arrived bitter and bright. Annalise was huge now, ready to give birth any day. Mrs. Henderson came by frequently, checking on her, making sure everything was prepared. Fletcher was a bundle of nerves, jumping at every sound, convinced the baby was coming. On January 20th, Annalise woke before dawn with the first contractions. She lay quiet for a moment, feeling the tightening across her belly, then reached over to wake Fletcher. "It is time," she said. He was on his feet instantly, pulling on clothes, stoking the fire, running to fetch Mrs. Henderson. The older woman arrived calm and efficient, taking charge of the situation with practiced ease. The labor was long but not complicated. Annalise labored through the day and into the evening, Fletcher at her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement. When the crying came, it was not grief but effort, pain, and finally triumph as their daughter slid into the world just after midnight. "A girl," Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the squalling infant on Annalise's chest. "Healthy and strong." Annalise looked down at her daughter, at the red face and dark hair, and felt her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. Fletcher was crying openly, his hand gentle on the baby's tiny head. "Hello, Charlotte," Annalise whispered. "Hello, my darling Charlie." The baby quieted at her voice, and Fletcher leaned down to kiss both his wife and daughter. "She is perfect. She is a miracle." Mrs. Henderson cleaned and cared for them both, then left them alone to bond as a family. Fletcher climbed carefully into bed beside Annalise, and they marveled together at the tiny person they had created. "I wish Charlotte could see her," Annalise said softly. "I think she can," Fletcher replied. "Look at how peaceful Charlie is. I think her aunt is watching over her." As if in agreement, the baby sighed and nestled closer to Annalise's warmth. The weeks after Charlie's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Annalise was sore and tired, learning to nurse, learning to read her daughter's needs. Fletcher helped with everything, changing nappies and walking the floor with a fussy baby in the middle of the night. They were both sleep-deprived and overwhelmed, but deeply happy. When the end of January brought the monthly grief, Annalise was nursing Charlie in the rocking chair Fletcher had brought from town. The tears came as she looked down at her daughter's face, seeing hints of Charlotte in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her cheek. Fletcher knelt beside the chair. "What are you thinking? That Charlotte would have loved her so much, that it is not fair she does not get to be here. No, it is not fair, but Charlie will know her aunt through your stories, through your love. Promise me you will help me keep her memory alive for our children." "I promise." "Always." Charlie finished nursing and Fletcher took her, settling her against his shoulder to burp. Annalise watched her husband with their daughter and felt the grief and the joy mixing together, bittersweet and beautiful. February was brutal with cold that kept them mostly inside. Annalise focused on caring for Charlie and recovering her strength. Fletcher balanced work at the ranch with helping at home, and somehow they made it work. By the time the monthly crying came at the end of February, Annalise noticed something different. The grief was still there, sharp and real, but it no longer consumed her entire being. She could hold the sadness and the happiness simultaneously, could miss Charlotte while loving her life with Fletcher and Charlie. She was walking Charlie around the cabin, soothing her to sleep when the tears started. Fletcher looked up from the stove where he was making dinner. "I am all right," Annalise said before he could ask. "It is different now." "Different how?" "The grief is part of me, but it is not all of me anymore. I can carry it without drowning in it." Fletcher crossed to her, kissed her forehead. "That is healing, not forgetting, just healing." "I do not want to forget her." "You never will. Look at our daughter. Charlotte lives on in her name, in your stories, in the love you carry." March brought the first signs of spring and Charlie's increasing alertness. She was starting to smile, to track faces with her eyes, to coo and babble. Annalise was enchanted by every small development, and Fletcher was equally besotted with his daughter. They had fallen into rhythms as a family. Fletcher would come in from work and immediately reach for Charlie, talking to her about his day while Annalise prepared dinner. In the evenings they would sit together, passing the baby between them, planning their future. When the monthly grief came, Annalise was sitting on the porch watching spring arrive in the valley. Fletcher joined her, Charlie asleep in his arms. 3 months old already," Annalise said, reaching over to stroke her daughter's soft hair. "Time moves so fast." "It does." Fletcher shifted Charlie carefully. "Are you all right?" "I am crying, but yes, I am all right. I was just thinking that Charlotte would be 21 now if she had lived. She would probably be married, maybe expecting her own baby. She would have been a wonderful mother, she would have, and a wonderful aunt." Annalise wiped her eyes. "I am grateful that Charlie will grow up hearing about her. She will know she is named for someone special, someone who was loved fiercely." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them. April brought warmer weather and the beginning of another garden season. Annalise was back to work, though at a slower pace with a baby to care for. She had fashioned a sling to carry Charlie while she worked, and the baby seemed content to watch the world from her mother's arms. Fletcher had been promoted to assistant foreman, a recognition of his hard work and reliability. The promotion came with a small raise in pay, which they were saving toward eventually buying their own land. The monthly crying came while Annalise was planting lettuce, Charlie strapped to her chest. She worked through the tears, her hands in the soil, her daughter warm against her heart. Fletcher found her there and knelt to help with the planting. "I am learning to let the crying just be part of my rhythm," Annalise said. "It comes, I feel it, and then it passes, like the seasons." "That seems healthy." "I think it is. I think I am finally learning to live with the loss instead of being destroyed by it. Charlotte would be proud of you." "I hope so." They finished the planting together, then Fletcher took Charlie so Annalise could wash up. As she watched her husband walk toward the cabin with their daughter, Annalise felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly buckled her knees. She had survived the worst thing she could imagine, and somehow found not just survival but genuine happiness on the other side. May was beautiful, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the garden growing lush and green. Charlie was becoming more interactive, laughing at her father's silly faces, reaching for her mother's hair, fascinated by everything around her. Annalise had started writing down stories about Charlotte in a journal, wanting to preserve every memory for Charlie to read someday. Fletcher would sometimes add his own observations, notes about the woman he had never met but had come to know through Annalise's stories. When the monthly grief came, Annalise was writing in the journal, Charlie napping in her cradle. Fletcher came in from work to find her crying over the pages. "What are you writing?" he asked gently. "About the time Charlotte and I snuck out to a dance when we were teenagers. Our parents would have been furious if they had known, but Charlotte insisted we needed the adventure." Annalise smiled through her tears. "She was always the brave one. You are plenty brave. Look at everything you have survived. Only because you helped me. We helped each other." He pulled her into his arms and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. In the cradle, Charlie stirred and sighed, and Annalise thought about how love expanded to fill whatever space you gave it. June brought heat and the constant work of the garden. Mrs. Henderson had expanded their operation, and Annalise was now managing 2 large plots plus the hothouse. Fletcher helped when he could, and they hired a local teenager to assist with watering and weeding. Charlie was 6 months old now, sitting up on her own, grabbing everything within reach. She was a happy baby, quick to smile, and both Annalise and Fletcher were completely devoted to her. The monthly crying came while Annalise was harvesting peas, Charlie playing on a blanket nearby. The tears were gentle this time, more wistful than anguished. Fletcher appeared as he always did, drawn by some sixth sense that told him when Annalise needed him. He sat on the blanket beside Charlie, who immediately crawled into his lap. "How are you today?" he asked Annalise. "Missing Charlotte but grateful for what I have." Both at the same time. "That sounds about right. Fletcher, when did you stop crying for your father every month?" He considered this. "I am not sure I have stopped entirely. It is less regular now, but sometimes the grief still catches me. I think that is normal. So I might cry for Charlotte for the rest of my life." "You might, but it will not always hurt this much, and I will always be here when it does." She looked at her husband, at their daughter in his lap, at the garden growing around them, and felt the complicated mix of grief and gratitude that had become her normal. Life was not simple or painless, but it was good. It was worth living. July brought Annalise's 24th birthday, which Fletcher celebrated by giving her the afternoon off while he watched Charlie. Annalise rode into town and spent a luxurious hour browsing the mercantile and having tea with the preacher's wife. When she returned, she found Fletcher asleep on the bed, Charlie dozing on his chest, both of them peaceful. She stood in the doorway watching them, her heart full to bursting. The monthly crying came a week later while Annalise was doing laundry. Fletcher found her bent over the washboard, tears mixing with the soapy water. "I was thinking," she said without looking up, "about how Charlotte will never have this. A husband who loves her, a child to raise, a home of her own." Fletcher took the shirt she was washing and rinsed it himself. "That is a deep loss, for her and for the world. The children she never had, the love she never knew. How do I make peace with that? I do not know if you can entirely. You just keep living, keep loving, keep honoring her memory. That is all any of us can do." They finished the laundry together in silence, working side by side as they so often did. When Charlie woke from her nap, they took her for a walk to the creek, letting her splash in the shallow water, delighting in her laughter. August marked 2 years since Annalise had first arrived in Granite. She stood behind the blacksmith's forge where Fletcher had found her that first time, remembering the woman she had been. So broken, so certain she would never heal. Now here she was, healed not in the sense of the wound disappearing but in the sense of learning to live with the scar. Fletcher found her there, of course. He always found her. 2 years, she said as he approached. 2 years, he agreed. A lot has changed. Everything has changed, but I still miss her just as much. Missing her is loving her. That will never change." They walked back to the cabin together, hand in hand, partners in grief and joy alike. Charlie was with Mrs. Henderson for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. In the cabin, Fletcher pulled Annalise into his arms. "I love you," he said. "I love how you honor your sister. I love how you mother our daughter. I love how you have let me help carry your pain. I love you too. I would not have survived without you. You would have, but I am glad you did not have to." They made love in the afternoon sunlight, gentle and familiar, celebrating the life they had built together. Afterward, lying in Fletcher's arms, Annalise felt the monthly tears come. But they were different now, tinged with gratitude as much as grief. September brought the final harvests and preparations for winter. The garden had been wildly successful, and Annalise had earned enough to put a significant amount toward their land fund. Fletcher's wages had increased again, and they were getting close to being able to buy a small ranch of their own. Charlie was 9 months old, crawling everywhere, pulling herself up on furniture, babbling constantly. She had Fletcher's eyes and Annalise's dark hair, and she was the light of their lives. When the monthly grief came, Annalise was reading Charlie a story, though the baby was more interested in trying to eat the book than listen to it. Fletcher sat nearby, mending harness. "I want to tell you about your Aunt Charlotte," Annalise said to Charlie, who looked up at her mother's voice. "She was brave and kind, and she would have loved you so much." Charlie babbled something that might have been agreement, and Annalise felt the tears come. But she kept talking, kept telling her daughter about the sister who would never meet her, and Fletcher listened, adding details Annalise had shared with him over the months. By the time the story was done, Annalise's face was wet with tears, but her heart felt lighter. This was how she would keep Charlotte alive, through stories, through love, through the family she was building. October brought the first snows to the high country and discussions of buying land. Fletcher had found a small ranch for sale about 5 miles from Granite, just over 100 acres with a creek running through it, and a cabin that needed work but had good bones. They rode out to see it one crisp autumn day, Charlie bundled against the cold. The land was beautiful, rolling meadows backed by mountains, perfect for cattle and horses. The cabin was small but could be expanded. Annalise could already picture a garden stretching from the front porch. "What do you think?" Fletcher asked. "I think it is perfect. I think we could build a real life here. Then let us make an offer." By the end of October, the deal was done. They would take possession in the spring after the winter passed. Annalise was thrilled and terrified in equal measure. It was a huge step, leaving the security of the ranch for their own place. When the monthly crying came, she was packing their belongings in preparation for the eventual move. Fletcher found her holding one of Charlotte's dresses, one of the few things she had salvaged from the wagon accident. "I wish she could see this," Annalise said. "Our own land, our own ranch, everything we used to dream about." "She can see it," Fletcher said with certainty. "And she is happy for you." "How do you know?" "Because she loved you, and love wants happiness for those it cares about." Annalise folded the dress carefully and tucked it into the trunk. It would come with them to the new ranch, a piece of Charlotte to bless their new beginning. November was consumed with preparations. Fletcher was working extra hours to save money for supplies they would need come spring. Annalise was planning the new garden, making lists of seeds to order, thinking about where to place the chicken coop and the root cellar. Charlie took her first steps in mid-November, lurching from Fletcher to Annalise with a triumphant shriek. They both cheered, and Charlie was so delighted with herself that she immediately did it again. When the monthly grief came, Annalise was watching Charlie toddle around the cabin, marveling at how much she had grown. Fletcher came in from work and immediately sensed the tears, sad or happy crying. He asked, pulling her into his arms, both, wishing Charlotte could see Charlie walking, grateful for everything we have. Those can exist together. I am learning that. Charlie toddled over and grabbed both their legs, looking up with a huge smile. They both laughed, and the grief shifted, making room for the joy. December brought bitter cold and the celebration of Charlie's first birthday. Annalise made a special cake, and Mrs. Henderson came to celebrate with them. Charlie was more interested in smashing the cake than eating it, and everyone laughed at her chocolate-covered face. Christmas was quiet but lovely. Fletcher gave Annalise a beautiful leather-bound journal for recording more stories about Charlotte. Annalise gave Fletcher a new saddle she had been secretly saving for. They gave Charlie wooden toys that Fletcher had carved, and she was delighted with all of it. The monthly crying came on a snowy evening. The three of them were sitting by the fire, Charlie drowsy in Fletcher's lap, when Annalise felt the familiar tightness in her chest. 3 years since she died, she said softly. Fletcher reached for her hand. And look at all that has happened in those 3 years. Would Charlotte want you to stop living because she cannot? No, she would want me to live twice as much for both of us. Then that is what you do. You live fully, you love deeply, and you keep her memory alive. That is the best tribute you can give her. Annalise wiped her eyes and looked at her daughter, already falling asleep against Fletcher's chest. We are going to tell Charlie all about her aunt, every story we can remember. Every single one, Fletcher agreed. January 1881 arrived with news that Annalise was pregnant again. The timing was good, giving her the winter to adjust before the move to the new ranch in spring. Fletcher was ecstatic about another baby, though also worried about Annalise managing pregnancy and a toddler and a move all at once. We will manage, Annalise assured him. We always do. Charlie was walking everywhere now, getting into everything, a bundle of energy and curiosity. Annalise was tired all the time, between the pregnancy and chasing a 1-year-old, but she was happy. When the monthly crying came, Annalise was resting on the bed while Charlie napped beside her. Fletcher came in to find them both asleep, Annalise's face still damp with tears. He covered them with a blanket and simply sat watching them, his wife and daughter, his whole world. When Annalise woke, she found him there. How long have you been sitting there? Not long. Just thinking about how lucky I am. I am the lucky one. You saved me, Fletcher. We saved each other. February brought preparations for the move. They would relocate to the new ranch in April, once the worst of winter had passed. Annalise was almost 4 months pregnant now, starting to show, and Charlie was becoming more independent every day. The monthly grief came while Annalise was sorting through belongings, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. Fletcher found her crying over a small box of Charlotte's things, trinkets and letters and a lock of her sister's hair. This is all I have left of her, Annalise said. These objects and my memories, and the stories you tell, and the love you carry, and the daughter you named for her. Fletcher knelt beside her. Charlotte is not gone as long as you remember her. I will never forget her. I know. They packed Charlotte's things carefully, reverently, to be treasured in their new home. March brought warming weather and excitement about the move. Fletcher had been going to the new ranch regularly, making repairs to the cabin and outbuildings. Annalise went with him once, bringing Charlie, and stood on the porch looking out at the land that would be theirs. This is where we will raise our children, she said. This is where we will build our life. Our own piece of the world, Fletcher agreed. When the monthly crying came, they were at the new ranch, working on the cabin. Charlie was napping inside, and Annalise was helping Fletcher mend the porch rail when the tears started. Fletcher set down his hammer and pulled her into his arms. What brought this on? Just wishing Charlotte could see all of this, wishing she could be part of it. She is part of it. You carry her with you, so wherever you go, she goes too. They stood on the porch of their new home, holding each other, honoring the past while building the future. April brought the move. With help from ranch hands and neighbors, they transported their belongings to the new ranch over the course of a week. The cabin was small but cozy, with room to expand as their family grew. Annalise immediately began planting the garden, eager to dig into the rich soil. Charlie adapted quickly to the new home, toddling around exploring every corner. Fletcher was busy from dawn to dusk, managing the small herd of cattle they had purchased and making endless repairs and improvements. The monthly crying came while Annalise was planting the first seeds in her new garden. Fletcher found her kneeling in the dirt, tears falling onto the dark earth. "Planting a garden for Charlotte?" he asked gently. "Everything I plant for her too, for the life she should have had." Fletcher knelt beside her and helped press seeds into the soil. "Then we will make it beautiful." They worked together until the sun began to set, creating new life from the earth, honoring old love with new growth. May brought warmth and the rapid growth of both the garden and Annalise's pregnancy. She was 6 months along now, moving slowly but still determined to do her share of the work. Charlie was a constant companion, helping in the garden by pulling up weeds and occasionally vegetables. Fletcher had hired a young ranch hand to help with the cattle, a shy 18-year-old named Thomas who worked hard and asked few questions. The extra help meant Fletcher could spend more time helping Annalise and caring for Charlie. When the monthly crying came, Annalise was sitting on the porch watching a storm roll in from the mountains. Fletcher joined her, Charlie asleep in his arms. 4 years of crying every month, Annalise said. 4 years since Charlotte died. Does it still hurt as much? She considered this. The pain is just as sharp when it comes, but it does not last as long, and there is so much joy surrounding it now. The grief is part of my life, but it is not my whole life anymore. That is as it should be. The storm broke, rain falling in sheets, and they stayed on the porch watching the water bring life to the land. June brought summer heat and a thriving garden. Annalise was 7 months pregnant now, her belly large and the baby active. They had decided not to find out the gender, content to be surprised. Charlie was excited about becoming a big sister, though Annalise was not sure how much she truly understood. The monthly crying came while Annalise was preserving strawberries. Fletcher found her at the table, tears dripping into the fruit she was cutting. Charlotte loved strawberries, Annalise said. She would eat them until her fingers were stained red. Fletcher sat beside her and took up a knife, helping with the work. "Tell me more about her." So Annalise did, talking while they worked, keeping her sister's memory alive through stories and tears and the simple act of preserving fruit for the winter. July brought Annalise's 25th birthday and anticipation of the baby's arrival. She was 8 months pregnant, tired and uncomfortable but healthy. Fletcher had become expert at rubbing her aching back and swollen feet, and Charlie had learned to be gentle with Mama's big belly. When the monthly crying came, Annalise was resting in bed, too hot and pregnant to do much else. Fletcher brought her cool water and sat beside her, fanning her with a folded newspaper. "I am ready for this baby to arrive," Annalise said through her tears. "And I am not ready at all. You were ready with Charlie, you will be ready with this one too. Charlotte would have been such a help with the children. She was always so good with babies. I am sure she was, but you have me and Mrs. Henderson and half the women in Granite ready to help. You are not alone." "I know." But I still wish she was here. I know you do. They sat together in the summer heat, waiting for the baby, honoring the sister who would never meet her nieces or nephews. August brought the baby. Annalise went into labor on August 15th, 4 years and 3 days after Fletcher had first found her crying behind the blacksmith's forge. The labor was faster than with Charlie, and before midnight, she had delivered a healthy baby boy. "A son," Fletcher said with wonder, holding the small bundle carefully. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Annalise asked, exhausted but elated. They had discussed names but never decided. Fletcher looked down at his son, then at his wife. "What about Frederick Quinn?" "Frederick Charles," Annalise suggested. "Charles for Charlotte. Perfect." So Frederick Charles Quinn entered the world, a healthy baby with his father's eyes and a lusty cry. Charlie was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to touch him constantly, and had to be reminded to be gentle. When the end of August brought the monthly crying, Annalise was nursing Frederick while watching Charlie play. Fletcher was repairing a fence but came immediately when he heard her tears. "Happy or sad?" he asked, though he could see it was both, wishing Charlotte could meet her nephew. "Grateful for everything we have, missing her, loving you, all of it at once." Fletcher sat on the floor beside her chair, his hand on her knee. "That is life, I think, all the emotions mixed together." "I would not change any of it," Annalise said. "Even with the grief, I would not change a moment of the last 4 years. Neither would I." September brought cooler weather and the rhythm of a family with 2 young children. Annalise was constantly busy, nursing Frederick, chasing Charlie, managing the household. Fletcher helped whenever he could, and Thomas the ranch hand had proven himself valuable and reliable. The monthly crying came while Annalise was hanging laundry. Fletcher found her standing among the clean sheets, tears streaming down her face, Frederick asleep in a sling on her chest. "Tell me what you need," he said simply. "Just this. Just you being here." He stepped closer and wrapped his arms around both her and the baby. They stood there in the warm September sun, clothes drying on the line, healing and hurting all at once. October brought the first anniversary of buying the ranch and plans for expansion. They wanted to add rooms to the cabin as the children grew, and Fletcher was designing the addition himself. The ranch was doing well, the cattle healthy, and they were actually making a profit. Charlie was almost 2 now, talking in full sentences, constantly asking questions. Frederick was 2 months old, smiling and cooing, beginning to find his own personality. Annalise was exhausted and happy, living fully in the life she had built from the ashes of her grief. When the monthly crying came, both children were asleep and Fletcher found Annalise standing at the window, looking out at the mountains. "What are you thinking?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "That Charlotte would have loved all of this. The ranch, the children, you. She would have been so happy for me. She is happy for you. I truly believe that." Annalise turned in his arms. "I love you, Fletcher Quinn. Thank you for finding me that first time and every time since. I will keep finding you for the rest of our lives. Promise, promise." They stood together in the quiet house, their children sleeping, their future stretching before them bright with possibility. The grief would come again next month and the month after and probably for the rest of Annalise's life. But Fletcher would be there, steady and sure, saying the right nothing, offering the perfect presence. They had learned to carry the loss together, to make space for both grief and joy, to honor the past while building the future. November brought Thanksgiving and a gathering of friends and neighbors at the ranch. Mrs. Henderson came with her husband, and several other ranch families joined them. The house was full of laughter and food and children running everywhere. As Annalise looked around the table, at Fletcher holding Frederick while helping Charlie eat, at the friends who had become family, at the life they had built. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest. But this time when the tears came, they were tears of gratitude as much as grief. Fletcher caught her eye across the table and gave her a small smile, an acknowledgement of everything they had been through, everything they had survived, everything they had built together. The monthly grief came later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed. Fletcher found Annalise in the rocking chair, crying quietly. He pulled a chair close and sat facing her, taking her hands in his. "Talk to me. I was just thinking about all the Thanksgivings Charlotte will never have, all the holidays, all the ordinary days, everything she is missing. I know. That is a real loss, and it is all right to grieve it. But I also have so much to be thankful for. You, the children, this home, this life. Is it wrong to be happy when she never got the chance?" "No," Fletcher said firmly. "It would be wrong to waste your life in grief when she does not have the choice to live at all. You honor her by living fully, by loving deeply, by being happy. That is what she would want." Annalise nodded, knowing he was right. They sat together in the quiet house, holding hands, united in grief and gratitude and love. December brought Charlie's second birthday and preparations for Christmas. The cabin was decorated with pine boughs and the children were excited, even though Frederick was too young to really understand. Annalise had made new clothes for both children and was working on a special gift for Fletcher, a quilt made from scraps of fabric that represented their journey together. The monthly crying came on Christmas Eve. The children were finally asleep, and Annalise stood looking at the small tree Fletcher had cut, decorated with simple ornaments and candles. Fletcher came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Thinking of Charlotte, always, but especially tonight, Christmas was her favorite. She loved everything about it, the decorations, the food, the gathering together. "Then we will make Christmas special for her and for our children. We will create traditions that honor her memory. I would like that." They stood together looking at the tree, and Annalise felt the grief and the joy intertwining until she could not tell where one ended and the other began. January 1882 brought bitter cold and the news that Annalise was pregnant again. The third baby was unexpected but welcome, due in late summer. Fletcher was beside himself with joy, already planning another addition to the cabin. Frederick was 5 months old, a happy baby who rarely fussed. Charlie was helping more with the household tasks, proud to be a big sister. The ranch was thriving, and they were building the life they had always dreamed of. When the monthly crying came, Annalise was sitting by the fire with Frederick in her arms and Charlie leaning against her side. Fletcher had just come in from the cold and found his whole family gathered together. "Room for one more?" he asked, settling himself on the floor at Annalise's feet. "Always room for you." She was crying softly, but it was gentle crying, the kind that washed clean rather than drowned. Charlie noticed and patted her mother's arm. "Sad, Mama. A little bit, sweetheart. But also very happy. Happy and sad. Yes, both at once. That is all right sometimes." Charlie seemed to accept this and went back to playing with her doll. Fletcher reached up and took Annalise's free hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "5 years since I first found you," he said quietly. 5 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like a whole lifetime ago. Both are true. I never thought I would be here, Fletcher. Married with children, running a ranch, happy despite everything. But you are. I am, because of you. Because of us, he corrected. We built this together. Frederick made a soft sound and Annalise looked down at her son, then at her daughter, then at her husband, her family, her life. Charlotte was gone, and that would always hurt. But here in this cabin, surrounded by love, Annalise had found a way to carry the grief and still live fully. She cried every month without fail. Fletcher found her every time. He said the right nothing, offering presence instead of platitudes, silence instead of solutions. And together they built a life rich with love and loss, joy and sorrow, remembering and moving forward. The grief would come again next month and the month after that, likely for the rest of Annalise's life. But it no longer defined her. She was not just the woman who lost her sister. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a gardener, a woman who loved deeply and lived fully and honored the past while embracing the future. And Fletcher would always find her, would always sit with her through the storms, would always help her carry what could not be set down. That was love, real and enduring, tested by grief and proved unbreakable. February brought Valentine's Day, and Fletcher presenting Annalise with a beautiful necklace he had commissioned from a jeweler in Denver. It was a silver locket with two tiny photographs inside, one of Charlie and one of Frederick, with room for more as their family grew. "It is beautiful," Annalise said, touching the smooth silver. "Thank you." "Open it again," Fletcher said. She did, and this time she noticed a tiny inscription on the inside lid. "Forever finding you," it read. Annalise's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Perfect. It is absolutely perfect." The monthly crying came while she was wearing the locket. She was in the root cellar, organizing preserves when the grief rose up. Fletcher must have been watching for her because he appeared within minutes, descending into the dim space, just as he had that first time in the boarding house root cellar so long ago. This time he did not sit across from her. He sat beside her, pulled her close, and let her cry against his shoulder. His hand found the locket at her throat, and he held it gently. 5.5 years, she said when she could speak. "You would think it would get easier. Different is not always easier, but look at you. You are still standing, still living, still loving. Charlotte would be so proud. I hope so. I know so." March brought warming weather and preparations for spring planting. Annalise was 3 months pregnant, dealing with morning sickness while managing 2 young children. It was exhausting, but Fletcher was a constant source of support, taking over whenever she needed rest. Charlie was fascinated by the idea of another baby, constantly talking to Annalise's still small belly. Frederick was 8 months old, crawling everywhere and getting into everything. The cabin was chaos and joy in equal measure. When the monthly crying came, Annalise was planting early peas in the garden. Charlie was helping by digging in the dirt, and Frederick was napping in a basket nearby. Fletcher found them there, his wife crying while his daughter played, and his heart swelled with love for all of them. He knelt in the dirt beside Annalise. "What can I do? Just be here. That is always enough." So he stayed, working alongside her, helping plant the garden while she cried and healed and grew new life in the earth and in her body. April brought Easter and a gathering at the ranch. The small cabin was bursting with neighbors and friends, and Annalise had cooked for days preparing food. The celebration was joyful, children running everywhere, adults talking and laughing. As the sun set and people began to leave, Annalise stood on the porch watching. Fletcher came up behind her, his arms encircling her expanding waist. "Good day?" he asked. "Very good." Charlotte would have loved it. She always loved gatherings. "Then we will keep having them, keep celebrating, keep living in a way that would make her happy." The monthly grief came later that night. Both children were asleep, and Annalise sat in the rocking chair, one hand on her pregnant belly, crying quietly. Fletcher found her there and knelt before her, his hands covering hers. "Talk to me. I was just thinking that this baby will never know Charlotte except through stories. Frederick barely knows her and Charlie not at all except what we tell her, and eventually their children will only know her as a name, a distant relative who died young. That is the nature of time, Fletcher said gently. But the love does not fade. The stories keep her alive. And every time you tell your children about their Aunt Charlotte, she lives again in those words. Promise me we will never stop telling them about her. I promise. We will tell them, and they will tell their children, and Charlotte's memory will live on through generations. Annalise nodded, accepting this, finding comfort in the continuation. She might cry every month for the rest of her life, but Charlotte would never be truly forgotten. May brought their third wedding anniversary and reflections on how much their lives had changed. They had a ranch, 2 children with a third on the way, a community of friends, and a love that had only deepened with time. Fletcher gave Annalise a leather-bound book filled with blank pages. For more stories about Charlotte, he said. The first journal is almost full. She hugged him tightly. You are the best man I have ever known. I just love you. That is all. That is everything. The monthly crying came while Annalise was writing in the new journal, recording a memory of Charlotte that had surfaced. Fletcher read over her shoulder, adding details she had told him, helping preserve the story. June brought summer heat and Annalise's growing belly. She was 6 months pregnant, moving slowly, tired from the heat and the pregnancy and chasing 2 active children. Fletcher had hired additional help for the ranch so he could spend more time supporting his wife. Charlie was almost 3 now, talking constantly, full of questions and energy. Frederick was 11 months old, pulling himself up on furniture, on the verge of walking. The cabin was controlled chaos, and Annalise loved every minute of it. When the monthly crying came, she was sitting in the shade watching the children play. Fletcher joined her, his hand finding hers automatically. 6 years since Charlotte died, she said softly. 6 years since I found you crying behind the forge. Best thing that ever happened to me, you finding me. Best thing that ever happened to me, you letting me stay. They sat together, watching their children, honoring the past, living fully in the present, dreaming of the future. July brought Annalise's 26th birthday and Frederick's first birthday. The celebrations were simple but joyful, surrounded by friends and family. Frederick took his first steps on his birthday, lurching from Fletcher to Annalise with a triumphant cry. The monthly crying came while Annalise was baking bread. Fletcher found her kneading dough with tears streaming down her face. Charlotte taught me to bake bread, she said. I can still hear her voice telling me to knead it longer, to be patient with the rising. Fletcher came up behind her, his arms around her, helping her knead the dough. Then every loaf you make is a tribute to her. I had not thought of it that way. She is in everything you do, every skill she taught you, every value she instilled. She shaped who you are, and that never dies. August brought the baby. Annalise went into labor on August 10th, and this time the delivery was quick and straightforward. Within hours she had delivered a healthy baby girl with dark hair and Fletcher's eyes. Another daughter, Fletcher said, holding the tiny bundle. What should we name her? They had discussed this. Rose, Annalise said. Rose Charlotte Quinn. Fletcher's eyes grew bright. Perfect. Charlotte would have loved that. Charlie and Frederick were fascinated by their new sister. Charlie wanted to hold her constantly, and Frederick kept trying to share his toys with her. The cabin was fuller and louder and more beautiful than ever. When the end of August brought the monthly crying, Annalise was nursing Rose while watching the older children play. Fletcher sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. 3 children, she said through her tears. Charlotte would have been such a wonderful aunt to them. She is their aunt, even if they never met her. She lives in the stories, in the name we gave Rose, in the values you teach them. I want them to know her. They will. We will make sure of it. September brought cooler weather and the rhythm of a family with 3 young children. Annalise was busy from before dawn until late at night, nursing Rose, managing Charlie and Frederick, keeping the household running. Fletcher helped constantly, and Thomas the ranch hand had proven himself invaluable. The monthly crying came while Annalise was folding laundry. Fletcher found her holding one of Rose's tiny gowns, tears falling onto the soft fabric, missing Charlotte, always. But especially now with a new baby. She should be here helping me, cooing over Rose, playing with Charlie and Frederick. Fletcher took the gown and folded it carefully. She is here in spirit if not in body. Can you feel it? Annalise paused, considering. Maybe. Sometimes I feel her presence, like she is watching over us. I believe she is. October brought the anniversary of their land purchase and plans for further expansion. The ranch was thriving, and they were considering buying additional acreage. Fletcher had become a respected rancher in the community, and Annalise's garden operation was legendary among the mining camps. Rose was 2 months old, a contented baby who rarely fussed. Frederick was learning to talk, his vocabulary expanding daily. Charlie was a constant helper, taking her big sister role seriously. When the monthly crying came, all 3 children were napping and Annalise sat on the porch watching autumn arrive in the valley. Fletcher joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand, thinking of Charlotte. Always thinking of Charlotte, but also thinking about how blessed I am, how much I have when I thought I had lost everything. You never lost everything. You always had yourself, your strength, your capacity to love. I had you. We had each other. They sat in companionable silence, drinking coffee, watching the seasons change, grateful for the life they had built. The years continued in this pattern. Every month without fail the grief would find Annalise. Sometimes it was gentle, sometimes overwhelming, but it always came. And every month without fail Fletcher found her. He sat with her, held her, listened to her stories about Charlotte, said the right nothing. He was a constant in the storm, an anchor in the grief, a partner in both sorrow and joy. They had more children. Thomas, born in 1883, named for the ranch hand who had become like family. Margaret, born in 1885, named for Fletcher's mother. Grace, born in 1887, because by then they recognized that grace was what carried them through. The monthly crying continued through all of it. Through pregnancies and births, through childhood illnesses and growth, through ranch expansion and community involvement. Annalise cried every month, and Fletcher found her every time. The children grew up hearing stories about Aunt Charlotte. They knew about her laugh, her dreams of being a teacher, her love of strawberries, her terrible singing voice. They knew about the wagon accident, about their mother's grief, about their father's patient love. Charlotte became part of the family lore, a beloved aunt they had never met but knew intimately through stories. Charlie, the oldest, took it upon herself to record all the stories in writing, creating a book of memories about the aunt she was named for. Frederick learned to bake bread the way his mother had been taught by Charlotte. Rose insisted on having strawberries at every meal in summer in honor of the aunt who loved them. The younger children each found their own ways to honor Charlotte's memory. Years passed. Decades passed. The ranch grew and prospered. The children grew up, married, had children of their own. Annalise's hair turned gray, then white. Fletcher's back grew stiff from years of ranch work. But the monthly crying continued, and Fletcher always found her. One summer evening when Annalise was 73 years old and Fletcher 76, they sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, the result of a long life built on love and persistence. Annalise felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the monthly grief rising despite the many years that had passed. Fletcher noticed immediately, as he always did. He reached for her hand, gnarled fingers intertwining with hers. Their eldest grandson, Charlotte's namesake Charlie's son named William, noticed his grandmother's tears. "Are you all right, Grandma? She is missing her sister," Fletcher said before Annalise could speak. "Your great-aunt Charlotte, the one who died in the wagon accident. That is right." William thought about this. "But she died so long ago. Why do you still cry, Grandma?" Annalise looked at her grandson, then at Fletcher, then at the assembled family that had grown from the ashes of her grief. "Because love does not end, sweetheart. I loved your great-aunt Charlotte, and I will love her until the day I die. The crying is just love with no place to go except out through my tears. But you are sad. Sometimes. But I am also happy. I can be both at once." Fletcher squeezed her hand, and Annalise felt the weight of all the years, all the months he had found her, all the times he had said the right nothing and simply been present. Their love had been forged in grief and tempered by time, and it had created something beautiful and lasting. That night, after the family had gone to their own homes and the house was quiet, Annalise and Fletcher lay in bed together. The monthly crying had passed, as it always did, leaving Annalise peaceful. "Thank you," she said into the darkness. "For what?" "For every time you found me. For every time you said nothing and let me cry. For building this life with me despite the grief." Fletcher pulled her close, his arms as strong as they had been 50 years ago when he first held her. "It was my honor, every single time." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, partners in everything, united by love that had survived loss and emerged stronger. The grief would come again next month, and the month after, and Fletcher would find her as he always had. That was their pattern, their promise, their love made manifest through presence and patience and the right nothing said at exactly the right time. And when Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, Annalise cried for him every month just as she had cried for Charlotte. But she was not alone in her grief. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, finding her when she cried, sitting with her in silence, learning the art of presence that Fletcher had taught them all. Annalise lived to be 97 years old, surrounded by a family that numbered in the dozens, all descended from the love that had bloomed in grief. On the last day of her life, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she smiled peacefully. "I will see them both soon," she said. "Charlotte and Fletcher, they are waiting for me." And when she closed her eyes for the final time, it was with the certainty that love never truly ends, that grief is just love persisting beyond death, and that the right nothing said at the right time can heal wounds that words alone could never touch. Her children buried her between Fletcher and a memorial stone for Charlotte, 3 souls united by love that transcended time and death. And in the generations that followed, the story was told and retold about the woman who cried every month without fail, and the cowboy who found her every time and said the right nothing, and the love that grew from grief into something eternal and unbreakable and absolutely beautiful.